like to play video games at work. You don't focus as much as previous generations, and you're Gen Z, right? It's almost as though there's some sort of generational pattern here of people who are working, engaging differently.
But I fuck like crazy.
But they fuck hard, dude. Let's talk about Gen Z, because this actually relates to it quite well.
Yeah, I do want to. Okay, so a couple weeks ago, I just stumbled upon an article about Gen Z specifically having lower rates of participation in romantic relationships. And that was kind of the catalyst for getting into this topic. But I think we, even on the episode, I think it was the first episode we did, where we talked about Gen Z being more lonely than other generations. And I think I have looked into things, why is Generation Z seeing all these trends of different things in their life going a very different direction than it was for millennials and Gen X, all these people before them. Specifically, this is, while researching, what is affecting Gen Z primarily, I was surprised across all of these countries, the US, Canada, UK, France, Germany, South Korea, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, all of them have lower rates of alcohol consumption.
They don't drink.
They're drinking less than previous generations. They are having less sex than previous generations.
They don't fuck.
They have lower rates of participation in dating in general, or like fewer romantic relationships.
They're Sigma.
And then this frequency. So even if you are getting older, like for example, maybe there's a delay in like Gen Z people are on average having sex for the first time later in their life. But even once they've had sex later in their life, they have it less frequently than millennials did or the previous generation did at the same ages.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning for this, because I read the article you sent, that all of this stuff is about previous generations at the same age. So they measured for that. They accounted for the fact
how much sex boomers are having right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like
it's funny because it's also that. It's actually also that. But when I was reading through the stats, because I was careful with the wording, because I was
Gen Z is having less sex than boomers right now. They're like 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
What?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was.
So it's also
Wow.
also that was the thing. It's like depending on the studies you're reading, they are delivering a different version of the information. So I saw that and I was like, well, maybe it makes sense. You're in your like 40s, your 50s. You either are in your like marriage with a consistent partner. You're more confident in yourself. Like there's a bunch of reasons I could see why maybe you're having sex more than somebody who's like 18. But it's when you just hold these things across the same age groups, like when you look at the stats of these previous generations, when they were 18 or when they were 25, these things hold true. The other thing that is also declining in all of these places is cigarette smoking. However, this is the one I want to put an asterisk on, is this is heavily offset by the growth of vaping in most of these countries. Right, so nicotine use is actually not declining very much at all, but cigarette smoking is falling.
A universal constant.
A lot.
Is that a plus? I think that's
that's
better.
a small dub, right?
I don't know.
It's not big, but it's slightly
Aren't
better.
Zins less harmful than cigarettes?
Getting way more nicotine though. Is that?
But doesn't it like hurt your lungs less?
It hurts your lungs specifically less. I'm not going to go out here and explore the consequences.
Also, you're not a doctor?
The other thing I wanted to mention too is
cigarettes are bad.
When is AI going to solve cigarette smoke?
The marks of adulthood that we might say, like getting a part-time job or learning how to drive. It depends a little on the country here, but overall in all of the countries I had mentioned, these are also happening at later times in life. So the main thing we wanted to zone in on here is specifically the lower rates of sex and participation in relationships. And one thing that was pretty shocking to me is probably the first thought I had was, how much of a fall off is it really? When did this trend actually start? Were millennials dealing with this in comparison to Gen X, or Gen X in comparison to boomers?
Is it a longer trend? Yeah.
So if we looked at participation in relationships in the US, it looks like in their teen years, about 78% of baby boomers had a relationship at some point during their teen years.
When they were teens, okay.
And then Generation X, 76%. So basically the same thing, right? But then millennials, it drops to 66%. And then Gen Z, it drops to 54%, which is crazy. And that fall off is so aggressive. But one thing I think is interesting about this, because we're going to delve into, I think, why we think these things are happening, and just general opinions and perspectives of also people in the Discord that we talk to about this, is I think the first immediate answer that a lot of people want to go to is phones and technology and the isolation that comes from that. But millennials saying 66% makes me think about this a bit differently. It feels like a trend, especially because it's across so many different countries as well, that makes me think this trend, like if you just removed phones from this picture altogether, my feeling is that this percentage would still be lower. Maybe not as much. Maybe there's a lot of factors at play here, but I do feel like because there was already a slight downward trend starting, that phones and the internet aren't the only thing at play affecting this. And I wanted to open up this to you guys is why do you think this is happening? I think it's crazy that across all of these countries, these are places across Europe, North America, Asia, the trends are all the same. So why?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to say is, so Gen Z is a pretty broad range of experiences. Like the youngest Gen Z is 13 right now, and the oldest is 28. So the older Gen Zs are basically millennials. Like they have very similar cultural markers growing up. And then the youngest Gen Zs are basically Gen Alpha. They say skibbity riz and they play fucking Roblox. So it's like it's a huge gap. Like that, a 28-year-old and a 13-year-old have almost nothing in common.
It reminds me.
I hang out with a lot of them. Yeah, we get along.
When I was like early 20s or whatever, and all these same conversations happen about millennials. And I would look it up. Some New York Times writer would be like, millennials love experiences. They're very experience driven. And I was like, there's like 100 million of us. What the fuck are you talking about?
So broad.
This is me to my best friend were different people. Don't lump me together with 90 million people. It's
Guy
so
who
obviously
hates experience.
This is extremely overgeneralized.
No, it's super broad. So that's what I want to say. I think there's a lot going on here. I think phones is one part of it. It's affecting everyone of all ages, and maybe Gen Z more.
We should all 80 million Gen Z are Sigmas, to be clear.
That is true.
That's undisputed.
True.
Yeah. But for everything else, there's nuance, right?
Dude, the jaw lines of this generation could cut diamonds.
But one thing I noticed when reading a lot of those comments too from our viewers talked about this is like, man, one through line over and over is COVID. Where I feel like that hit Gen Z like a certain age of Gen Z, especially like a baseball bat to the head, dude. I think that racked up some damage socially, and cultural markers get just delayed, like dating and getting a license, and all these things got majorly delayed. And I think those were happening anyway, and I'm sure the trends are longer term, but man, did COVID like accelerate it and throw things for a loop. And
maybe speaks to the aggression of the fall off rather than not being the sole factor.
Let me throw out some quotes from our Discord. So these are folks who I pinged about. I sent pinged like 3,000 people last night in the Discord. Sorry about that, but got a lot of good feedback. So from Erwin, since COVID, talking about socializing and how they felt like socializing was pretty normal up until COVID. Since COVID, this has completely degraded. I lost contact with most of my university friends because of it. For what I heard of younger people still in university during and since COVID, it has not gotten back to normal in terms of social aspects I experienced. From Fummy, the biggest part of the problem, in my opinion, is mental health. COVID had a huge impact on it and messed everything else up as a domino effect. And then other people basically saying COVID like pushed everything back. So what might be happening is it's just taking 4 years longer for Gen Z to have the same experiences. So one quote I thought was interesting from B2 Brawler was 30 is the new 20. Everyone's going to be piping in like 5 years when all the Gen Z and baby millennials start getting to 30, since the runway to adulthood has expanded.
Hey, good for you. You're almost there.
Yeah.
You're almost about to start piping. You start piping for stuff.
I'd say for me, I look at my 30s.
I wonder what it'll be like.
As my dad described the 20s. And then there's other sentiments of like it being pushed back. So I think that's really interesting. And even, again, it's like Gen Z is not like some wildly different experience, right? Like we're really all in the same camp here, unless you're that old, but
younger than you.
But it does seem interesting. Of like all of us, I think, have experienced the fact that our parents were like, "Oh yeah, we were like married and having kids by age like 24."
Oh, dude.
And none of us do. I mean, not none, but like for our generation, it's been pushed back so far. So I do wonder to what degree like millennials and Gen Z specifically were just having our adult phases pushed back, and then COVID accentuated that.
Dude, I think that's my grandma called me for my birthday recently. Very sweet. And I asked her, I was like, hey, grandma, what were you doing when you turned 34? She's like, yeah, I was on my third kid. I was like,
wild, man.
And she was like
Meanwhile,
talking about, her like 10th
yesterday.
job. I was like, yeah, I played played Hitman on stream. It's wild. I mean, I do feel like these cultural markers getting pushed back. Some part of it has got to be economic too, right? Not just fun. It's got to be like people are having a tougher time. If you have no clear path to buy a house or whatever, then everything seems stretched out. Like that used to be something you could do on your first job at 20, 21. You could put a down payment on a house, right?
Yeah, but okay. I do think that